So in all the examples in the last video, we saw your computer running the Ask Steve extension, connecting directly to a large language model running remotely that could then take the text that you sent it and do something to it to help you get your job done better and faster. But those large language models cannot talk to external systems like Salesforce or HubSpot or things like that. But you can call just a normal API using Ask Steve. It doesn't have to be a large language model. And if you can call an API, that means that the code that runs on the other end of that API can then call any other APIs that you want to. So it can interact with any external system that you can imagine that can be interacted with via API. So as an example, I wanted to build a lead tracker that would allow me to highlight leads on a web page, right mouse click, say Ask Steve to, and add to my lead tracker. And then I wanted them to all be added to this spreadsheet. Now, a large language model couldn't do that on its own, but I built my own API, and I could do that writing either just code, or in this case, I built it using this third-party visual workflow tool called N8N. You can see it up there, n8n.io is their website. So I built my own API that I can call. The lead gets sent in, and that lead can be who knows what format. Name, role, company, name, company, role, name, enter, / role, company. It could be any variety, and then I send it to a large language model to say, hey, take this data coming in unknown format and put it out in known format, name, role, company, so that I can put everything into the appropriate columns in this sheet and then send a confirmation message to the user. And we can see here that I'm interacting with sheets, but you can also see that this particular service, N8N, has nodes for a number of different services out of the box, and anything that you can make an API call to is supported by something like this. So now I can trigger this entire flow directly from Ask Steve. So here I'll pick these two speakers, Lisa and Tim. I'll say Ask Steve to add them to my lead tracker. I will go pick this person in a completely different format here and say Ask Steve to add to my lead tracker. I can even go to this newspaper article that mentions CEO Tim Cook of Apple, and I can select that whole paragraph and say Ask Steve to add to my lead tracker. And then if we go look at my lead tracking spreadsheet, that flow that I showed you a second ago is what's being called, and it's extracting the information, getting it into structured data so it can go into the right columns, and writing it directly into this Google Sheet. And in this case, it's also adding a LinkedIn search and the URL where I captured that person from. And so you can imagine now, if you can build any kind of logic on the back end of an Ask Steve interaction, you can imagine that potentially you have like an email and it's got like an employee record number. You can highlight that, right mouse click, and say, Ask Steve to get me the latest update on this employee. And you can imagine it calls an API that pulls that data from multiple different systems, puts it all together, maybe sends it to a large language model to write it up nicely, and then gives it back to me right here in Gmail, and I've never left Gmail. So this unlocks a tremendous amount of power with Ask Steve to connect to your internal and external systems to bring all the data that you have in your company into exactly where your employees are already working.